Greetings out there, and welcome to another show of Tell It Like It Is. I'm your host, Morris, man, and my co-host is
Spencer Joseph.
And today we're going to do a special video or show. And the show is entitled, What is your favorite decade so far in your life and why? And I've asked some of my subscribers, and they were kind enough to message me some of their answers. And I'm going to read one out of there right now. And this is Sam. How you doing, Sam? Sam basically says, favorite decade. I would say the 80s so far, due to the fact that I was a young child from 3 to 12 years of age in this decade. Fairly carefree and pop culture at the time, especially the music. And I would agree with you, Sam. That's my favorite decade too, the 80s, and I'm gonna tell you why. It was more so a coming of age. You know, I was becoming a young man out of high school, going to college, working. The music was fabulous. You know, the rock music was on point. Pop and synthesized music was coming into view. R&B was strong. Ballads, Freddie Jackson, and Luther Vandross and people of that nature. Carefree to an extent, but yet starting to become your own. I look at the decade now, and of course somebody's decade out there is right now their favorite decade. But one thing I can say about the 80s, and I'll turn it over to you, is when I was living the 80s, I knew that it was special. It was just something about that particular decade where everything came into focus. Like I said, the music was on point. Working, just starting gathering your own stuff, getting out there and becoming a man. So I'm gonna, go elaborate more on that, but I'm gonna turn it over to Joe, because I don't know what Joe's favorite decade is, and he's about to share it with us. So you have the floor, my friend.
All right. Well, I'm a couple minutes old on his, so I have.
I'm a 2-minute egg, and he's a 3-minute egg.
So I have several decades. I remember the 80s, but my favorite decade started in the 60s. Now you understand what I'm talking about. I had the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, year 2000. And the music was a renaissance music for me also, music and art. I happen to be an artist. I caught the end of that period they call the Bohemian Beatnik era, which went into the hippie era. The music had changed. Rock and roll had developed more than Elvis Presley. Fashions had changed. The 60s and the 70s was a renaissance period for me and a lot of other people my age. It was an era where I discovered new foods. I got into different cultures. I began to realize cultures have different music and different arts. That was a renaissance going on. I went through that hippie era. Andy Warhol. And some people I want to get into right now. And music and art always influence our decades.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I wasn't too crazy about that disco thing, not at all. It was like synthetic music to me, because when I first started off in music, most of the music I got was acoustical music. They had electric guitar, but most all the music was acoustical music. And with the arts, the new arts that came out, the new graphics and stuff in the 60s was a wonderful era. It was so far away from the classic paintings and sculptors, and the new graphics were wonderful to me. I really enjoyed my era. The politics, religion, you started getting a better understanding about politics. Like he said, he was coming of age in the 80s, and I was coming of age in the 60s, and I had the 60s and the 70s. It was interesting. I had a good time.
Yeah, let me read another one. Here's another one from one of our subscribers, Tony. How you doing out there, Tony? And thanks for your input. And here's read this, 60s, for the music, and you want to know why. The genre didn't matter. Radio stations played everything, and you're exposed to everything, from Frank Sinatra to Dean Martin to Aretha Franklin to George, Paul, Ringo, and San Francisco psychedelic, Detroit Motown, Deep South Soul, New Orleans pop, funk, and Philly, Chicago blues. You could even throw in some Marty Robbins. So that's Tony's favorite era, the 60s. And the 60s, I would have to say, was a pivotal point in that decade. Mm-hmm. I mean, in that century. Because a lot of things took place. The civil rights movement, music, Woodstock, black people finally trying to bond together and make a strong voice and not be treated like second-class citizens. So that was a very pivotal decade in that century because I was born in the 60s. And, I was a little guy in the 60s, and I kind of knew what was going on, In the late 60s, about 69 is when I can start having really clear recollections of the 60s. But for me, again, the 80s was everything to me because, again, and it's because of my age at that time. I was coming of age. But unfortunately, some things that were kicking off near the end of the 80s was kind of ugly and negative. The AIDS thing kicked off. Reaganomics was starting to affect the country and still does to this date. So there was some bad things brewing on the horizon in the 80s. But overall, to me personally, that was a wonderful era. And I always kid, and actually I'm not kidding, but if I could build a time machine, I'd go back to the 80s and stay forever,
Well,
Love it.
and music thing, back in the 60s and early 70s, there's a lot of politics in music because of the money and all that. We don't have time to get into that, but it was really tripped out. I used to sing a little bit also, and entertainment business is, it's tripped out. I think I learned more being out in the world instead of that ABC thing. I'm not telling everybody to quit school, because you need a degree in something.
But experience is his best teacher. Because there's just some things a school classroom can't teach you. And you have to really go out there and learn that this is what you need to do to be productive. Let me read another one. And this is from my good friend Larry. And let me just say this about Larry. Majority of my subscribers should thank Larry for the music because Larry is the reason why I put so many videos up for covers because I wasn't thinking about the numbers and how many I was doing. I was just doing because I enjoyed it. But, Larry chimed in and said, man, this guy's got about 800 videos. In another 2 months, he probably have 1,000. And it kind of clicked in my head to kind of increase the numbers. So I thank you, Larry, for the encouragement that you've given me. And I'm sure that my subscribers do from all these extra covers. But let me kind of read just a summary of Larry's answer as far as what is his favorite decade. And it reads like this. I'm from the old school, clubbing days, and I guess it would be the 70s. They were very informative years. Many, many great memories came out of that time. I remember cutting grass for $5 or $4 and saving up for my first $25 guitar at the pawn shop when I was 12. And I can go to Hardee's and get a good cheeseburger and fries and a drink and get change back from my dollar. I remember those days, Larry. I used to go to the record store, and that was a big-time thing for me. I would go and buy 8 tracks and put them in my cars and enjoy it. There was no CDs or no DVDs, and all the rich folks who had VCRs, but they were beta in format, and gasoline was 50 cents. And he goes on and kind of, go into more detail about, why the 70s was such a great period for him. And I agree. As you get older, you look back and see all these things that you had at your disposal. They were relatively inexpensive, as opposed to now a $500 phone. I'm like, I'm not paying $500 because a phone to me just does this. I make calls, I get texts, I send texts. I don't need to watch TV on the 2-inch screen because I watched the TV on the 7-inch screen back in the 70s and I didn't like it then. So why am I digressing? I got a big 52-inch screen TV and that's what I like watching my TV on.
Where kids think they're fascinated with that smaller screen.
And then it's marketing. I mean, a lot of people don't realize how strong marketing is because I talk about it all the time when I do my guitar videos where I'm not a $2,000 guitar guy. I'm not going to spend $2,000 on a guitar because it's not the guitar, like Larry said. It's not the wand, it's the wizard. So you can go out there and spend all that money you want. That's not going to make you a better guitar player. What makes you a better guitar player is practice, practice, and practice. As opposed to you spending $2,000 on a guitar. Now, if you want to spend your money and you rolling like that, hey, more power to you. But don't see the logic in it when it's not necessary.
That money thing. On my first job, I was working in a box factory, and one of the older guys, a friend of mine's father, looked and said, I hear you working. And I said, yes, sir. He said, how much you making? I said, well, I'm clearing $67.50 a week. And he, oh man, you're making grown man's wages. And I began to realize $67.50 a week bought you a car,
Yeah.
paid rent, and bought food and clothes for the kid. And I was really upset because I figured that was enough money.
Yeah, well,
You
that's
know?
why it's good to go out there in the world to gauge what
Yeah.
is reality. Because
Yeah.
a lot of times we don't have a concept of reality if we're not out there experiencing it. Because, like you said, you thought that that was not enough, and he's
Right.
telling you get more than enough.
Yeah,
You
grown
know,
folks' wages.
right? And
is
some
all.
people don't realize that until they interact with other people and realize what things are,
And
for what they are.
my first date, I had $5, and we were smoking. I bought 2 packs of cigarettes, bus fare, and we got 2 burgers.
Yeah,
And I came home with change.
yeah.
With $5 now, that's a cup and a half coffee.
Yeah, I mean nowadays not a super high end date, not a McDonald's date, somewhere in the middle date will cost you anywhere from $40 to $80.
$40
In a
to
nice
$80.
restaurant, good service, good food.
Yeah. Now this is true. You know, I know.
Yeah, but we're gonna wrap this up because we can sit here and go down memory lane forever. But I'm just gonna give you my last closing remarks. Again, for me, the '80s. You know, I just enjoyed that time period. I realized when I was living it that it was a special period, and I thank God that I grew up in the era that I did during that time. So I turn it over to you, and then we're gonna close.
Mine was between 1965 and 1975. You know, and a little piece of the late '80s. I had went up to Canada, and you have to learn to use your time wisely because, as you can see, it goes quickly. Yesterday I was 18.
And you can't recapture it.
And you can't
Yeah,
recapture
you
it.
can't go back and relive something that you want to relive. Enjoy that moment when you can and recognize that it's a special moment. And then on that note, I'm going to close off. But again, I want to thank my subscribers, Tony, Sam, and Larry for being kind enough to send in your thoughts on or your answers on why these decades were your favorite. So on that note, I'm signing off. I'm Morris, man, and my co-host again is
Joseph Spencer.
And until next
I got
time.
one more thing to say.
Okay.
This time is not long enough to get into what that time based to our lives and influence other people's lives. Now, good night.
Okay, on that note, I always keep thinking, take care.
Bye.